All right, hello everyone. This is Hafsa here, a Somali American diaspora member and advocate who focuses on women empowerment initiatives throughout the Horn of Africa. I'd like to welcome everyone and our viewers to our discussion today. Our discussion is titled Ethiopia's Expansive Wars and Its Impact on the Horn of Africa. This discussion is hosted and facilitated by Minnesota. Can we remain on mute, everyone? Our discussion is titled Ethiopia's Expansive. We're waiting on Dr. Faisal before we start the program. All right, hello everyone. This is Hafsa here, a Somali American diaspora member and advocate who focuses on women empowerment initiatives throughout the Horn of Africa. I would like to welcome our viewers to our discussion today. Our discussion is titled Ethiopia's Expansive Wars and Its Impact on the Horn of Africa. This discussion is hosted and facilitated by Minnesota's Institute for Horn of Africa Studies, a nonpartisan entity or think tank formerly known as Horn of Africa Policy Center, which focuses on the sustainable solutions of issues in East Africa from a Somali lens. The objective of this conversation is to better understand the ongoing crisis and events in the Horn of Africa and the war on Tigray. The aim is to also bring diverse voices together in fostering a peaceful future. During this discussion, let us be mindful of our words and expressions. Going to pass it over now to our main moderator for today's program and co-founder of Tigray Action Committee, Hausen Gebremedin.
Thank you, Hafsa, and hello to our panelists and our audience tuning in from across the globe. As Hafsa mentioned, my name is Hausen Gebremedin, and I am co-founder of Tigray Action Committee, a nonprofit dedicated to helping end the Tigray genocide. I am honored to be moderating today's panel with such esteemed guests. Today we are joined by, I wish I don't see Dr. Faisal. Hafsa, do you know if he'll be joining soon?
Yeah, we're hopeful he'll be joining us in a few moments. So we'll just
Faisal will be joining us. Mohammed, can you let him in?
Excellent. Well, while we wait for Faisal, so obviously we'll be joined by Faisal Roble, Principal City Planner and CEO for Racial Justice and Equity for the City of Los Angeles, Professor David Shin, former ambassador to Ethiopia and Burkina Faso, Dr. Ezekiel Gebesa, History and African Studies Professor at Kettering University, Isaias Halimariam, legal scholar, Renee Lafaux, researcher and author specializing in Ethiopia, and Johannes Abraha, former diplomat, Master Governance and Development. As Hafsa mentioned, today's panel discussion will be about Ethiopia's expansive wars and its impact on the Horn of Africa. The military operation against Tigray and its people is destabilizing the entire Horn of Africa, let alone only Ethiopia. In Tigray, hundreds of thousands of civilians have been killed by the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments, millions have been displaced, and human rights abuses have been rampant. Moreover, across Ethiopia, continuous interethnic conflicts between various groups, including Amhara and Oromo, and Afar and Somali, plus mass displacement of vulnerable communities, famine, and an increase in al-Shabaab activities are being reported. This is just a small overview of what's happening in the country. Change is imminent and it is needed. To get started with the panel, I'd like to start this conversation by giving each panelist a minute or two to answer this question. What is the greatest issue facing Ethiopia at this time? And I will start this off with Renee, if you don't mind starting us off.
So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having invited me. So how do I see the situation? I believe the situation is very, very bleak, because whatever you look on, all doors through which one could expect to get out from the present crisis are, in my view, closed. I don't see that the war will stop soon, or that even more a sustainable solution could be found. Between Abiy and TPLF, the rift is so deep that I don't know how they could compromise. If they compromise about a cessation of hostility or a ceasefire, okay, which is of course highly commendable, this will be only tactical or opportunistic. Why? Because their view cannot be negotiated and so as to reach a compromise. Now the international crisis, the international community has, in my view, an erroneous view of the crisis. It completely lacks the historical perspective to understand what is happening now. For the international community, usually, the conflict between Abiy and the TPLF is the root of the crisis. It's not the root of the crisis, it's only the tip of the iceberg, okay? The root of the crisis is the, I would say, the heritage. Hello? Hello?
Yes, Renee, we can hear you. And for our participants, please remain on mute. Thank you.
Okay, so for me, the root of the crisis is simply what I have called the decolonization of the former Ethiopian empire. And that is not understood by the international community. So that means that they push for a solution which cannot be a lasting and long-time solution. And first, I am very bleak because that's probably for me the most important. I don't see any internal dynamic which would open one of these doors and at least show the way to by which a solution, a sustainable solution could be found. The opposition is totally absent, okay? You have now two main actors in this conflict, Abiy and its armed forces, and the armed opposition movements, TPLF mainly and Ola mainly. But I would say the non-armed opposition is totally inexistent. And that's for me the main problem today to progress toward a solution.
Thank you, Renee. I'll ask the same question to all the panelists. So Faisal, I'll go to you next. What do you believe is the greatest issue facing Ethiopia at this time?
Well, I think I agree with Renee in many ways, in the sense that Ethiopia's problem is not the day-to-day issue that may be capturing the international attention. It may also present to Ethiopian political leaders something to really kind of go around and talk about it. But I think Ethiopia's number one problem is state formation. What the world sees and how it sees Ethiopia and what the people who live in Ethiopia see is totally different. Ethiopia's exceptionalism has been sold to the rest of the world, that Ethiopia is this nation state that has defeated European colonial powers, that stands the good image that Africa is supposed to have, and all that kind of narrative, which makes zero sense to many of the Ethiopians. As a matter of fact, Ethiopia holds to Ethiopians the contradictions that many societies that like America would have. Ethiopia is on the one hand a big nation or a state that has a lot of different people that serves as Africa's image for outsiders. It's also an African state that enslaved Africanists. Those of us who speak Amharic, we know the word Baria, Shankilla, meaning Negroid, Darky, Baria meaning slave. And some of us even lived recently when those institutions were thriving in Ethiopia. So as Rene indicated, Ethiopians want to undo that, but the world is married to the previous Ethiopian exceptionalists. That's the conundrum. So whether you sit at a negotiating table at the UN or a US-sponsored and EU-sponsored negotiation to resolve the conflict that we face today, whether it's in Tigray, in Oromia, or even before this in the Somali region, these two images are on the table. And I and people like us would like to talk about the image that is not the beautiful Ethiopia, and the world would like to protect this thing that has been given to us. And there comes really the joining of the hip between the oppressive governments that usually is at Aret Kilo and the international. That's where they join. The two of them just by this translation. So the Tigray conflict that we see, the Oromia war, the hither of Somali conflict, which probably experienced it under EPRDF, a less intensive blockade that Tigray is now experiencing about 2 years. There is an endemic issue that we really need to do and redo about Ethiopia. I think what the road that we have been traveling at this point is to really maintain what the world and the UN and the West would like to maintain, which is the Ethiopian state. And find the debate would be, how should we maintain the Ethiopian state? Even if we take the hit, as those of us who have lived there, if we accept some shortcomings within the state, but what is a bit different state that we can have? And the current struggle in Ethiopia, when we will talk about that later in the discussion, is really beyond the Tigray conflict. I think the Tigray is the sacrificial lamb, if you will. So one way or another, either what Rene talked about would be on the table and how we talk about Ethiopian state formation, or the war would continue until one person or one side is eliminated. Thank you.
No, thank you, Faisal. That's a great response. Thank you. Ezekiel, thank you for coming off mute. Same question to you.
I think thank you, everyone. I just want to build on what Renee and Faisal said. Biggest issue is that Ethiopia this time is there is a civil war in the entire world, and people of goodwill in Ethiopia are trying to stop the civil war without really understanding and getting to the roots of the civil war. And I think it's important to define it for what it is. Sometimes this war is defined as a war between Abiy and Debrecen. Sometimes it's defined as a war between the federal government and the regional state of Tigray. Sometimes it is presented as an ideological war between federalists and unitarists. All of this at different levels may be true. But the problem right now, the war that started as an ideological difference or a war of ideological difference, a civil war has escalated to a point where it's right now that Ethiopia is a state on the brink of a violent dissolution. And I want to underscore that. There could be disintegration with an agreement. There could be a velvet dissolution that could happen, but the Ethiopian one is a violent dissolution or disintegration. This is different from other controlled ways of dissolving a state that has become outlived its usefulness. So, but in the case of Ethiopia, it's going to be a violent dissolution. And the roots of the problem, to just put it in the different way, in a different way than what Renee and Faisal said, I think it is, it's a civil war that resulted from 3 monumental failures of state building. The empire that Renee talked about, the empire that was put together by force, death, and mayhem, had been trying to become a state for its citizens. They tried different things. First is assimilation, create a more cohesive and stable state through assimilation, through the deracination of ethnic identity, and create a nation, an Ethiopian nation state. That failed, as we know, some 50 years ago. And there was another attempt that was the accommodation of the interest of the nations and nationalities in Ethiopia through a multinational federation, through a constitution for a nation of nations. That's what Faisal Nahum said, a constitution for the nation of nations. If Ethiopia is a nation, it's a nation of nations. Was rejected, what was proposed, and that through the constitution and the federal system, the issue of inclusiveness, including this, rather than eradicating or eliminating the states, was proposed through accommodation. The multinational federation and the constitution of nations, constitution of a nation of nations, was rejected violently beginning in 2018. And the third was the democratization. Through democratization, we thought that we could probably go from a federal arrangement that was in place but did not work through democratization, and that also failed. So the various nations and multinational nations went back 50 years back to the period of the unitary state and wanted to establish a unitary state. And that's the failure of assimilation, accommodation, and democratization is basically at the roots of the conflicts. Unless you go into those issues and address them one by one, I think Ethiopia right now is on the verge of violent dissolution.
Thank you, Dr. Ezekiel. Isaias, I'll turn it to you. What do you believe is the biggest issue Ethiopia is facing right now?
Thank you very much. I think a lot has been said. I don't have anything to add, but I think the first problem is that the distorted perception of Ethiopia and the unity of Ethiopia. That's been one of the issues for many years, because certain groups in Ethiopia think that like they want to create Ethiopia in their image, the way they want it, not the way it should be. So that's the main problem. So Abiy's coming to power is just a cause. He's a Trojan horse of these unitary oppressive groups. So I think that one of the problems is the distorted perception of Ethiopia. We're not even agreeing what Ethiopia should be. I think that's the main problem we're dealing with. Obviously, the war will continue for some time. The economic and the collapse of the nation it's now a reality. Ethiopia, as we all know, is the powerhouse of the African political life, the home of the African Union and many international organizations, including UN for Africa. So political turmoil or a crisis in Ethiopia could mean it could pose a serious problem not only to the Horn of Africa but the entire Africa as well. So I think that's one of the problems. We're not agreeing what Ethiopia should be. I think there's the big difference. There's a rift. There's a political ideology. We're completely different in terms of what Ethiopia should be. And the second, like Professor Ezekiel mentioned, there's an unfinished state formation. So Ethiopia, the state formation of Ethiopia has not been completed. So we are not even agreeing on that. So since the previous regime, the emperor, so the state formation is still in the process. At some point, about 27 years ago, the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia, they try to create a federation by a social contract, but Abiy Ahmed breached the social contract. I can mention multiple reasons. First, he dismantled the constitution, invited Eritrea, and invaded Tigray, and obviously Oromia also, Oromia and Somali. So I think that's the main problem. The federation is dismantled, the social contract is breached, so the unfinished state formation process was interrupted again. So this is the second problem. So that being said, I think Ethiopia's problem, I'm not sure, I don't think it will be resolved sometime soon, but if there's real talk, if there's good faith, I think there's a chance, for a peaceful resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sias. Ambassador Shin, thoughts on that?
Sure. Most of the panelists have spoken in broader terms, looking at also the longer term situation for Ethiopia. I'm going to focus just on what I consider to be the most immediate problem facing the country. And that is, of course, the conflict in Eritrea, and or rather the conflict in Tigray and its implications for the region. I think that the conflict there has reached a phase of remilitarization, which makes it exceedingly dangerous, probably as dangerous as it has been over the last 2+ years. I think there's a situation where President Isaias of Eritrea is committed to defeating Tigray, ideally eliminating it and it as any potential threat to Eritrea. I think this is being joined by elements of the central government. And you have at the same time a feeling in Tigray that it is an existential threat to the region. So they're prepared to fight on for their very existence. This, I think, makes it an exceedingly difficult situation. And I worry that it may have reached the stage of not achieving a possibility of mediation or peaceful solution anytime soon. You have Professor William Zartman's idea of a mutually hurting stalemate for a lot of these conflicts around the world. And when you reach that stage, you can usually come up with some sort of mediation or peaceful solution. Unfortunately, I don't think that is the current stage in Tigray. I think the central government believes it now can win militarily, and I fear that that means this will continue as a military conflict for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Diplomat Johannes, any final thoughts on that specific question?
Thank you, Hussein, and I would like to thank the organizers as well. I think much has been said by previous speakers. Nice to meet you all, by the way, all panelists. Just 2-3 things. The first thing I think is mentioned by many of them, the nation building is at the core of the problem. But in that nation building, there is, I think, a crisis in accepting the reality on the ground. There is a reality that Ethiopia is a country of different nations, nationalities. But at the same time, there is entity who consider itself as a guarantor, as a protector of the state of Ethiopia or the nation of Ethiopia. I think there is a stark difference and antagonism on these issues. But I think the most important thing that should be raised at this time for Ethiopia to answer is there is an active genocide being committed by a state, by a government, by a country against its own people, inviting external actors as well. I think that's the most important question that Ethiopia and Ethiopians should answer at this time, because the people of Tigray are expecting for one. That's one. And combining these two, the problem, the failure of the nation building, plus a nation committing genocide against its own people, there's a bigger question now whether the country could be continued as it is or not. I think those are the things that we should be raised as the biggest question for Ethiopia. Thank you, Hausen.
Thank you, Diplomat Johannes. So a lot of the panelists today brought up the conflict in Tigray, the genocide in Tigray as being one of the top issues. So I have a few questions specific to that conflict. Starting with Isaias. Isaias, you have dedicated a significant amount of time educating the world about Tigray through social media and community activism. The US, EU, and other international bodies have praised territorial integrity as a red line in the war. Yet Eritrean troops have breached international borders and invaded Tigray, as you mentioned, from the beginning of the war, as recently as today. What do you think is required to see an end to the conflict in Tigray?
Well, thank you very much. So first, I think before going to the territorial integrity, I think first, I think it's wise to mention about the human cost of the civil war or the genocidal war, as we referred. So first, it caused the days of hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans and many other ethnic groups as well, not just Tigrayans for that matter. Food has been used as a means of warfare, as we all know. In Tigray, women and girls' bodies were battlefields. Basically, rape has been used as a method of warfare in violation of many international instruments, laws, including the conflict-related sexual violence, which was adopted by the Security Council. NATO. Sorry. And women and girls were raped in front of their parents. One of the objectives of this genocidal war is to break the spirit of Tigrayans. So obviously, a lot of horrible things have happened against Tigrayans. Tigrayans in the capital city of Addis and other cities in Ethiopia were hunted down, many of them languishing in concentration camps, as reminiscent of the Japanese internment during the Second World War, Holocaust, and apartheid in South Africa. Basically, what's happening against Tigrayans is horrible. This is one of the most horrible atrocities in modern times, I believe. The Washington Post at some point described the deadliest war isn't in Ukraine, actually, it's in Ethiopia, obviously, because hundreds of thousands have been killed, civilians. Nearly most of the international humanitarian laws were violated. We all know that. Despite all this, the reaction from the international community has been very disappointing so far. For example, the United States labeled the crisis in Ukraine as war crime in just 2 months after the war. Congress and Senate, they convened and they passed a law immediately. So obviously, what's happening in Ethiopia, specifically against Tigrayans and Oromia, Agao, Command, and many other groups is horrible. However, the reaction from the international community, including the United States and European Union, is very disappointing. I have to mention that. With that being said, I think you mentioned about the territorial integrity. Well, first, the concept of the territorial integrity in Ethiopia is misplaced because multiple international laws, including the UDHR, International Convention for Economic and Social Rights, and customary international law, all of them describe the principle of territorial integrity as something that's confined to countries, not between subsets or regions in a country. So I think that's one of the most confusing concepts. So first, you don't use territorial integrity when a region or state is in conflict with the mainland or another country. First, the concept is limited to inter-country conflict. So I think that's the first thing that should be corrected. When Ethiopia invaded a foreign country, Eritrea, and committed war crimes and genocide, allowing Eritrea to massacre and rape civilians, that is the classic example of territorial integrity. That's when the Ethiopian territory was breached, actually, the opposite, not the vice versa. So, multiple international laws, including the UN resolution, they're very clear. The territorial integrity is not an absolute principle for that matter. Even if there's legitimate or absolute military necessity, you don't invoke territorial integrity to commit genocide. So I think we have to be clear on that first. So Obviously, the international community, including the United States, there are multiple times they're mentioning about maintaining the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. Even the chairperson of the African Union, Musa, on the onset of the war about a year ago, he was saying that this is a law enforcement operation. The federal government of Ethiopia is trying to protect the Ethiopian unity and territorial integrity. That was very unfortunate because, like I said, the concept doesn't apply here. It's not about territorial integrity because the Ethiopian government already invited a foreign enemy, a foreign foe, Eritrea, and committed genocide against Tigrayans. So I think the concept of territorial integrity doesn't apply here. Actually, Tigray was invaded. Actually, the Ethiopian territory was breached because of the willful or wanton negligence of the Abiy regime. So I think this has to be clear. The double standard is very clear. When Eritrea invaded Ethiopia, which means Tigray, territorial integrity has been an issue. It hasn't been an issue actually. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it's an issue. So there's a double standard. I think we have to be clear on that. So again, the Amhara militia and other groups have invaded Tigray for almost 2 years. Western Tigray has been invaded. However, you don't hear it a lot. So when the Tigrayan army advances, the West is very quick to react. Hey, go back. You're passing the Amhara border, etc. But the Amhara militia has been in existence, like invaded Western Tigray for almost 2 years. So I think these are issues that needs to be clear first, I think.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Isaias. And Renee, I'll ask you a follow-up question to a bit of what Isaias was referring to about territorial integrity and specifically Eritrea's invasion into Tigray. I'm curious, in your opening statement, you mentioned that the situation is bleak and you don't think there'll be an ending to this conflict anytime soon. However, I'd love to hear from you how you think the international community should be responding to Eritrea's invasion. What steps do you think that they could be taking to support their claims of territorial integrity?
Is that a follow-up question? Okay.
That's for Renee. Thank you. And Renee, you are. Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Let me start with by recalling a memory. This happened more than 40 years ago in Paris. The first EPLF delegation came to France and they asked to discuss with me. Okay, I met them. And I was very, very surprised by one thing. They insisted a lot about the fact that Eritrea will be what they called the Yunnan of the Horn of Africa. And when they were asked to explain, in fact, they told that the EPLF, the Eritrean elite, has the legitimacy and the capability to lead the forthcoming revolution in the whole Horn. That was their position. They were at the front of the revolution, and this gave them the capacity and legitimacy to play a leading role in the forthcoming revolution in the Horn. Okay. Now, 40 years later, the situation is, of course, completely, totally different. But it's absolutely clear that Isaiah's obsession remains the same. He wants and he will be, and he is obsessed by becoming the godfather of the whole Horn. And he will never compromise on this obsession. Now, what could the international community do in this regard? In my view, very, very few. Mainly because Eritrea has proved that its regime can impose to its population to accommodate or support the sanctions, whatever the sacrifices imposed to the Eritreans. So I don't believe that very, very strong sanction from the international community would change the position of Isaias. But Isaias survived to the 98-2000 war. You know in which conditions and by doing what, okay? Now I am not sure that he is in the same position as at that time. He plays he's double or nothing, okay? And it's for him, even if he personally wouldn't change his position, I believe that there are internal factors in Eritrea which could play an important role, and more important role than the role of the international community. I am sure that the population now in Ethiopia is completely exhausted, and a lot of additional sacrifices has been or are now imposed on them. Will the population accept this additional sacrifices? I don't know, okay? But the fact is that since the beginning of the war, Isaias hasn't won anything. The territorial situation remains the same. TPLF is still in place. I think that the war will continue. So Isaias has nothing to offer to his population in regard to the sacrifices they were obliged to accept or were imposed on them. So the question is, for me, the main question is how long the population and probably part of the Eritrean elite will accept this failing strategy of Abiy.
Thank you. Thank you. Diplomat Johannes, I want to turn to you. We heard from Renee his lack of confidence that this conflict will end anytime soon, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. My question to you: there's been much debate about whether negotiations between the government of Tigray and the government of Ethiopia should be led by the African Union or by another negotiating body. As you know, both parties recently agreed to AU-led negotiations, but there's been no visible progress. At the same time, the siege continues, killing the most vulnerable. Can the African Union solve Ethiopia's crisis on its own? What are your thoughts on African solutions to African problems? And why do you think the negotiation process is taking so long?
Thank you again, Housen. So I think that's the core of the matter when it comes to resolution of the problem. The government of Tigray, as you all recall, we were offering this peace alternative since the very beginning. Before November 4th of 2020, if you all remember, the Tigray government were sending letters. Those letters clearly call for an open dialogue, inclusive dialogue between the parties in Ethiopia. We were from the very beginning, as for Tigray, from the very beginning, we were looking into what is coming, and we were giving the solution actually. The solution was to get together, sit down, and then discuss on the sticking points that the country were entering into. But there wasn't, unfortunately, anybody was listening. And in fact, the fact that Abiy was at that time using his misleading and charming whatever characters, the whole world were actually misleaded, and nobody were listening to what we were saying from Tigray. We're here because of that. Now, even during the very darkest moments, during the very difficult moments in Tigray, the Tigray government were still offering for peaceful resolution of the conflict, but nobody were listening. Every time the Ethiopian regime come up with a kind of ceasefire or call for an negotiated resolution of the problem, that means that they are either defeated on the ground or they just need some time for preparation for another invasion and so on and so forth. That's what they used to do. Now, we were saying from the very beginning, when it comes to the African Union, I am an African, and as a Tigrayan, we do not have any other fate outside of Africa. That's very clear in Tigray. That's very clear with the government of Tigray. But when it comes to the administration handling of this problem on hand, Isaias mentioned earlier that Musa Faki, with his own statement, with his own communique, he just supported actually the Ethiopian government in its offensive and it is massacre in Tigray. They didn't spell it out as such, but they just clearly said that Ethiopia is doing law enforcement operation in Tigray. That was wrong in the first place. Second, they were in fact obstructing any meaningful move at the level of the UN Security Council as well. The S3 countries, they were at the forefront to sabotage every initiative by other countries, including the US and some European countries as well. So that's another thing. But most importantly, African Union as a union, and in fact, many of the member countries were muted when it comes to the atrocities committed in Tigray.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Mohammed. Continue. Diplomat.
They were muted actually when it comes to the problem in Tigray. So what we were saying was that we are Africans. We believe, and I, as a former diplomat myself, I was preaching for these African solutions for African problems. But I have to admit that I didn't see any concrete and tangible actually move by the African Union in terms of resolving conflicts on hand. We have more than 20 conflicts today in Africa. And I'm stunned to be corrected. None of them are visible to be resolved by the African solutions for African problems dictum. We do have problems still in Darfur. We do have problems still in South Sudan. We do have problems in Somalia, in Libya, Western Africa, in the Great Lakes region. We do have a bunch of problems. The African Union is talking about resolving these problems, but none of them were resolved. But I must be very honest here. If there is any problem resolved in Africa, arguably, it was with the ultimate support of external actors. It could be the European Union, it could be the United States, or it could be the Arab League, by the way. Other than that, we didn't see an African Union clear solution for an African problem. But especially this time around, the African Union as an institution and the chairperson himself were standing at a blocking stop to the Tigray crisis. So we were very clear at the beginning. The African Union, if it's going to be resolved this problem, they have to come up with a clear position when it comes to the crisis on hand. There is a state-led starvation, famine, genocide in Tigray. They have to state their position clearly. They assigned, by the way, let me return you back a little bit to the beginning of the war. There were these eminent of personalities, elders of Africa, including Ellen Johnson Sirleaf from Liberia, Mozambique, South Africa, former presidents. Those eminent personalities, they were sent to Prime Minister Abiy at the beginning to talk about the issue in Tigray. They were just said, don't come back again. And the African Union didn't say anything. They were muted. Now they come up with a special envoy. Obasanjo were warmly welcomed in Magalang because we thought that he could understand the problems and who could come up with kind of roadmap to resolve the problem on hand. But that wasn't the issue. And again, this is not only the thought of Tigray or personally I, Johannes, but this is shared by many in Europe, in the United States as well. Obasanjo, regardless of his good intentions, he was not up to the job. That's why we came up, in fact, in consultation with the other mediators as well, that the peace process led by the African Union should be supported by competent and able staffs so that they can support the process and then we can move forward. But there's one problem, sticking problem at the heart of this problem, housing, and that is the Ethiopian government, the Ethiopian regime is not at all ready for peace. And why? If there's a peace process, they know what they did, they know their crimes, and they know that they will be held accountable if we go into that process. So I think that sums up the problem that we have when it comes to the African Union. But for the viewers, it's clear Tigray does not have Tigray does not have a problem with the African Union. We will never have problem with the African Union. But when it comes to the process of this kind, we need someone or an entity to handle the situation properly. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Diplomat. Thank you. So I want to turn a little bit to the other regions in Ethiopia and some of the activities that are happening there. And this next question is for Professor Ezekiel. Professor, can you tell us more about some of the conflicts that are happening in other regions, specifically about some of these other armed insurgent groups, such as the Oromo Liberation Army, the Kemant, Agao, Gambela, and Benshangul, and Gumuz Liberation Fronts? Are they working together? Are they coordinating any of their efforts, or are they working on their own?
I am just an observer like everybody else, and I could speak to that idea of coordination from what I observe. But before I actually speak to that question, I wanted to say that, look, genocide is being committed against the command. It actually started against the command in all its forms. And in action, genocide is being committed against the command. Genocide is being committed against parts of Oromia in Walaga. In intention and in action. Genocide is being committed against the Benishangul in Metekel. It is in intention and action. And I underscore that because genocide is basically about intention. So unless we see this in a broader issue, a historical issue, just by revising a constitution or rearranging the multinational federation, or simply resolving the current or ending the war, the conflict in some areas, is not going to resolve the problem in Ethiopia. And we're talking about the expansive civil war in Ethiopia in general. So even the notion of genocide must be seen in the broader context. Genocide is also have been committed against the Somali on a large scale. So that's important. So yes, in Tigray, genocide is being committed, and I think Johannes is saying active genocide. In that sense, yes, there is an active genocide that is being committed as far as I'm concerned, but it is also being committed against others. So it should be seen in that broader context. Because genocide is being committed, ethnic cleansing is being committed, both in terms of the expressions that Ethiopian government officials use and in terms of their action. The Oromo Liberation Front is fighting against the ethnic cleansing genocide. And look, at the end of the day, genocide is not just the killing of people. Genocide is that even if you're targeting a political group like the TPLF or the OLA, just because of what they believe in, if you are targeting them for elimination, that's what genocide is. Just because of what they believe is a group. It's not just against just an ethnic group. So the OLA has made tremendous progress in the last 4 years. And I don't want to go into where they were, but 4 years ago, when the democratization effort or the transition started, the OLF, which joined the transition, agreed to integrate the OLA into the Ethiopian security apparatus. That did not happen, but that's a long story. But in the last 4 years, they started from absolutely nothing. Then they transformed the OLA into a force to be reckoned with. Let me give you 3 examples of why I say that the OLA has become a force to be reckoned with. They have increased their fighters. Maybe OLA has about 40,000 to 50,000 fighters right now. They don't have any problems of people, young people flocking from cities to the countryside to join them. Their problem is accommodation, that they cannot accommodate the number or accept and integrate young people are flocking to them from all areas of Oromia, and then build them into an effective fighting force. That capacity is probably not there, but nevertheless, they have increased the fighting force to between 40 and 50,000 is my estimates. The second is that they have increased their area of, extended their area of operation. But 4 years ago, they operated on the borderlands of the Sudan in Kellam and Begi area. Today, they operate in the outskirts of Finfinne. They have also demonstrated, that's my third point, demonstrated their capacity to launch coordinated attacks on multiple targets. Last June, for the second time, the OLA attacked about 8 towns in Western Oromia at the same time, between 6 and 6:30. And that is really showing the capacity to launch coordinated attacks. So they have also demonstrated that capacity. The attack on Gambela, you asked me about coordination in Gambela, was conducted with the Gambela People's Liberation Front. There they coordinated their action to great effect, even though in the aftermath of their withdrawal, heinous crimes were perpetrated against Oromos, peaceful Oromos who live in the city of Gambela. Now, I guess now we are expecting more coordinated action, not between, put it this way, what OLA and the GPLF were able to demonstrate, we probably would want to see it on a larger scale. Now, the command, as I just said, have seen the brunt of the ethnic cleansing campaign launched against them by the Amhara national government and its militia, the Fano. They have withstood the assault, the incessant assault against the command people, and they have fought courageously against the ENDF, the Amhara regional government forces, and the militia, and they're still standing. So the command have also shown a tremendous courage in their fight against genocide. And keep this in mind about command. Keep this in mind about command. The Amhara regional government wants to annihilate them. It wants their land, but it doesn't want any command that does not accept being an Amhara. The same could be said about the Ago. I think the Ago Democratic Movement has been a fighting force. They have fought courageously against the ENDF in northern Ethiopia, mainly in conjunction with the TDF, but operating under the shadow of the TDF and demanding identity recognition. And that's really what the Ago are fighting for, so that the Ago are actually demanding that they be identified and they'll be recognized as Ago. So their fight is to be recognized, and for that their fight has been a struggle for visibility. But they have also demonstrated greater capacity to try to fight. And Benishangul Gumuz also on the receiving end of the ethnic cleansing. They have are orchestrated by the Amhara elite. And when I say the Amhara elite, it is the Amhara elite that are governing Ethiopia, including the deputy prime minister who went to Metakel region, assembled the settlers in the Metakel region. He said that we will arm you so that you defend your land, your people, and your homestead and your families. This is the deputy prime minister of Ethiopia who was speaking to the Amhara settlers in Metakel to fight against the Gumuz. So they've been fighting in that area as well. So now, are they coordinating? You know, they're all dying and they're all fighting. They're all courageous people. The coordination militarily, I cannot speak to, but what I can speak to is the political coordination. What is missing right now? We can talk about conflict and what is missing and what's not working. But I think what is really the area that requires serious coordination is the political side. And I think all of them must put a political alternative to the PP's vision, which is not working. We know it will not work. The PP's vision will not work. It will not end any conflict.
Yeah.
So the sorry situation is unsustainable. So the political coordination is what is needed.
Thank you, Doctor. As you mentioned, there is arguably genocide and ethnic cleansing happening throughout the country. My next question is for Dr. Faisal. What are your thoughts on the current battle against Al-Shabaab that's happening in the region, and the Mawisle and Dirak militias? What threat is Al-Shabaab to Ethiopia and the greater Horn of Africa? And what are the possibilities of eliminating Al-Shabaab from Somalia? What are your thoughts, Dr. Faisal? You are on mute.
Before I touch the Al-Shabaab and Mawisle and the current effort by Somalia to I would not say eliminate, but at least win over Al-Shabaab, I'd like to just make two quick observations. Number one, I think with Obasanjo, you have to recall that he was a colonel in the Nigerian army in the 1967 Biafra War, which resulted in genocide. And the most prominent Nigerian Igbo poet, Christopher Akambo, whom Ali Mazrui wrote a very fascinating account, chided and criticized the Igbo elite who were part of the genocide. It is very Orwellian to make Obasanjo the presiding authority to stop another genocide. This is just how Africa works. It's proverb of saying the fox that man is the hen is really playing here. Obasanjo should never have been somebody who would preside over the resolution of a genocide, because he was part of his own people's genocide. In terms of the whole AU and this and that, as a Somali, when I reflect back, probably we were the first African nation, and Dave Sheen could testify to this. We were the first people, whether we are in Kenya or in Somalia or in Ethiopia, to have lost trust in the structure of the AU and OAU before that. Because our history told us and taught us that OAU and then afterward is AU cannot resolve African problems. And on top of that, in the last 60 years, the leadership that has taken the mantle of power in Africa is nothing but an autocratic dictatorial circle. So today, in my opinion, AU is staffed by former leaders of Africa or high-placed bureaucrats in autocratic regimes. What solution can they bring to an issue like the Ethiopian issue? It's just a question that we need to ponder as we go and search solutions for this, for the Ethiopian quagmire. I think Al-Shabaab and Mawisle is something that we need to reflect. Well, although I welcome Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's new effort to fight and go Al-Shabaab where they are, but on the flip side of this issue is that Mawisle is born out of its frustration of the absence of Somali security structure to protect people and to help people. So on the one hand, yes, the new government of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud is moving in this direction. On the other hand, it was its absence, or the government in general, Somalia's National Army's absence to protect. They have scored certain goals and objectives so far. Al-Shabaab has been supposedly defeated in some parts of Hiran region and Beledweyne. I think what I'm worried is whether those successes are sustainable or not. Because the Mawisle effort is people rising up but the companion issue is that effort streamlined? Is there a command and control center that is disciplined? Is MIHAS just a revolt that is short-lived, or the Somali government will put all its effort to sustain the gains that so far? Now, it could be successful if the revolt of the local militia remains a Somali-led, Somali-owned process. My fear is that, knowing how the Somali state is fragile, that Somali ownership could be lost. And vultures like Ethiopia from Aret Kilo could see some advantage in coaxing the Somali leadership to give Ethiopia a part to play for its own sake, which would backfire, because the moment that MIHAS and people of Iran region and people of Beledweyne hear that Ethiopia is part of the quote-unquote pacification of Al-Shabaab, things could change. Because more than Al-Shabaab, or at equal terms, Somalis have also suspicion against Ethiopia. So if, and we know that President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud concluded his tour in Addis Ababa for 2 days, and one of the issues raised in their conversation was to collaborate and coordinate security issues, including the fight of Al-Shabaab. I don't know how deep that goes into giving a role to Ethiopia, but it would be a colossal mistake if the new leadership of Somalia gives Ethiopia any role beyond the ATSAM and IGAD that it already has for Ethiopia to play. There is just such a deep suspicion about Somalis when it comes to Ethiopia in their affairs. And I hope it doesn't bring Ethiopia to play. I think there are some lessons to be learned from the era of EPRDF, whether one likes it or not. And I was a critic of EPRDF from 1991 up to now. And I was thinking this morning I could speak to some of the issues in terms of the reversal of fortune that we see with Eritreans, with some of the MIHAS. I recall when the current UN rep was Taye Askeselassie was assigned to Los Angeles to become the consulate. They almost killed him. The very forces that are now supporting him, and I know individuals by their names, they almost killed him. And he came to me at the time I was working for the city of Los Angeles to open up doors for him. This is very strange, the lack of consciousness and morality about Ethiopian leadership. Today, the guy Taye talks about genocide as it never happened. His side is the very force that could not give him even a resting time in LA to sit back and do his work. And here is a Somali who believed in the greater African issue, and at least somebody who is a guest to come to LA to be left alone and helping. And I really, I cringe whenever, and he knows me and he probably is watching this. I cringe when I see people like Ambassador Taye, who were part of the core leadership of EPRDF, to today acting like TPLF leadership or their enemy, and they have to come and arrest them and eliminate. This is the crazy culture of Ethiopian politics that David Shin is very aware of. And in another format, he talked about himself, David meaning, how Ethiopian negotiation is not part of the equation in any situation, historically as well as current. One side should be eliminated, and that's what you see. Anyway, in the Al-Shabaab situation, there's one lesson that Somalia needs to learn from the EPRDF era, and I just gave an interview to Al Arabiya piece, and that is, in addition to the Liu police, in the era of EPRDF, you used to have local militia at the district and the village level that really served as the eyes and ears of the regional governments to, help make sure that Al-Shabaab doesn't come. One of the reasons why Al-Shabaab never really ventured into the Somali region in Ethiopia was not because of the Liu police, but because of the local militia. It also exists in the Oromia region, especially in the Muslim area. And I think if the government of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud buttresses the Mausley forces with some sort of local militia at the village level, at the district level, then they can contain. As you heard it today, they came back to a couple of locations. Al-Shabaab came back to a couple of locations because there was no infrastructure left after they were liberated. So there is a long road to go, but I will just watch for those two things to make sure that Ethiopia doesn't get involved in the pacification and fight of Al-Shabaab at this time. And number two, to follow up with an infrastructure to protect the areas that are liberated, including the services profession. And I think they can learn lessons, as I said, from the EPRDF era. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal. And you mentioned Ambassador Shin's work in this area, and I want to turn it to Ambassador Shin now for a question. I want to stay on the topic of Somali for just for a moment. Ambassador Shin, you have authored numerous writings on China's influence and involvement in Africa. Somali diaspora efforts in the United States and the UK are thought to be one of the main reasons that China's gas deals in the region were canceled recently. Ethiopia terminated its oil contracts with China in hopes of attracting American corporations into the region. The Somali people and their institutions have been vocal in their opposition to these natural resource deals. What do you believe is the future of oil and gas exploration in the region and elsewhere throughout the country?
I think there are two issues involving the future of gas and oil in the Ogaden region or in the Somali region generally. One is how economically viable is it? And there are many who think it is economically viable or could be over the course of time. The other issue is security and the ability of any foreign company to go into the region and know that it could do its work without being concerned about the security situation. The Chinese company that was recently asked to shut down its operation in the Ogaden, GCL Petroleum Corporation holding company, has been active in the Ogaden region since 2013. There were a series of agreements with the government of Ethiopia about what it was expected to do during its operations in the Ogaden. As I understand it, the government of Ethiopia concluded that the Chinese company was not fulfilling its contractual obligations and therefore shut it down, which is reasonable enough. Any government is permitted to do that. As far as other companies, including American companies, coming in to replace the Chinese company, I have not heard of any American company that is showing any particular interest in going into Somali region. Maybe there is one somewhere that I haven't heard of, but I'm skeptical of that. I think that the security situation alone, even in Tigray, which is well removed from Somali region, is enough to normally scare off American companies going into a country where there clearly are security issues. This may also have been the reason why the Chinese company did not fulfill its contractual obligations. I haven't heard the rationale from the Chinese company as to why they failed to meet the demands, but I would not be at all surprised but what it had something to do with security issues. So from my standpoint, I'm not very optimistic that any foreign country is going to be rushing into the Ogaden region, so long as you have an ongoing conflict in Tigray, which is slopped over into Amhara region and Afar region, and which is not that far away from Somali region, and where you had Al-Shabaab actually going into Somali region several months ago. That was a very short-lived intervention into Somali region, but it could happen again. So I'm not looking for foreign engagement anytime soon in Somali region.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's good to know. And we have about, I believe it is 17 minutes left in the program, and our answers have been lengthy. And so I want to give everybody maybe 2 or 3 minutes, either for a final remark or to answer this specific question, and Ambassador Shin, I'll get started with you. What do you think is key to rebuilding Ethiopia as a whole in the next 2 to 5 years? Or if there's anything else in this conflict that we have not discussed that you think is important for our audience to understand, I'd ask you to share them now. And again, panelists, if we can keep it between 2 to 3 minutes, that'd be great.
Well, as others have said, the issues in Ethiopia go well beyond Tigray. We focused mostly on Tigray in this session because I think that is the most immediate problem, but it certainly is not the only one. The problem, and the longer term problem in Ethiopia, is one of compromise and a willingness to listen to others, to understand that you don't have a monopoly on knowledge in any particular region or any particular ethnic group, to be more inclusive in terms of involving those people of goodwill who would like to see the continuation of a unified Ethiopia, which I would like to see, quite frankly, and involving more civil society, more women in the efforts to resolve the problems of Ethiopia. As I said at the outset of this program, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic at the moment in terms of the Tigray conflict. I'm afraid it has been militarized to the point that we may end up seeing a military solution to it. So all of these other efforts that I've just referred to are probably not going to happen anytime soon, but they are the things that must happen if Ethiopia is to survive as a coherent, successful nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Same question. I'll turn it over to Diplomat Johannes. Either anything that we missed that the audience must know, or what do you think is key to Ethiopia's success in terms of the next 2 to 5 years?
Thank you. There's a little bit of problem with the connection, so I'm not going to open my video, if that's okay, Hausen?
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Tigray still believes that a peaceful solution is possible, but a peaceful solution will be possible if and only if the regimes both in Ethiopia and Eritrea could be pressurized to the maximum. We remember Rene and Ambassador Shin were mentioning the 1998. We remember how the Isaias regime came into peaceful resolution to the aggression in Ethiopia in 1998. It was after decisively pushed on the ground. Unless this time we have either a push on the ground, a decisive one, or else the international community pressurized the two regimes actually. It's a stark violation of international laws, as you know it. Eritrea is aggressing a territory, a sovereign territory, and the international community is muted. So if we need a peaceful resolution, I think we need to come up with these two. I think as we speak, one of the Ethiopian generals is in Doha, Qatar. I guess Getachew Mohammed. They are talking about arms deal. They are talking about cooperation, military cooperation between Ethiopia and Qatar. We know that there is still recruitment on the ground. We know that there is procurement of arms. So the Ethiopian regime and the Eritrean, we know what they are doing. They are mobilizing everybody, actually, including 60 years of old and so on. So the international community, we should come up with a tangible push. If not, as Ambassador Shin said, that the ultimate solution will be a military at the end of the day. But we wish, as Tigray, we wish we could resolve the problem peacefully, and we still believe that it's possible with the help of the international community. I thank you, Hausen, and the organizers.
Thank you, Diplomat. Same question. I'll turn to Dr. Ezekiel for your thoughts.
I will start from where I started. I would start saying that from where I started, that what the biggest problem that Ethiopia faces is the violent dissolution of the state. So there are two actors that could help. One is internal, the other is external. The external is the international community. The international community right now have put their faith in the national dialogue to resolve all outstanding problems in Ethiopia, in addition to ending the war through cessation of hostilities, that they're going to use what they know from the books, from the experiences that they have, and apply it to Ethiopia. If that is the case, there is one thing that the international community should be concerned about, that the dissolution is either going to be Czechoslovakia style or the Yugoslavia style. That's what the problem is. Resolving it begins with the recognition of the depth of the problem. So Ethiopia really faces not just Yugoslavianization at this moment. As far as I'm concerned, Ethiopia faces Rwandization. That should be the concern. That should be the concern of the international community. So if the international community wants to resolve the problem, and the problem for themselves as well, because a violent dissolution of the Ethiopian state would send refugees all the way to the southern shores of Europe. Recognize the problem, the depth of the problem, and the trajectory of the war itself. Even if this war is going to end by, let's say, the TDF winning, what would happen the day after? How would you bring Ethiopia together? So what the international community should be worried about is that the current administration in Ethiopia has done a good job of dismantling the state, has done a good job of severing all cultural and religious and other ties that bind people together in Ethiopia. So the issue of territorial integrity or the country's national unity has already been dismantled. So if they really want to do something about it, is what about a year ago, Alex Rondos and Mark Medici proposed, and that is the Dayton peace process style. Force these Ethiopian combatants into the negotiating table by using any diplomatic arsenal that they have, putting aside diplomatic niceties, and then avert the coming Rwandization of Ethiopia. That is the problem. And internally, there must be some sort of a national salvation, because that's what the problem is. National Salvation Convention, where all Ethiopian forces that are now in conflict get together around a negotiating table and craft a settlement, another political settlement that will probably govern Ethiopia for the next 100 years. These two are the issues that I see should be worked out.
Thank you. Thank you. Esaias, any final thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you very much. So I think I just want to talk a little bit about the viability of the peace process, the peace talk, because this depends on many factors. First, there is a correlation between the Horn of Africa situation and the security of Ethiopia. Obviously, because Ethiopia, like I said, is the powerhouse, the political powerhouse of Africa. The African Union is housed in Ethiopia, and many international organizations are in Ethiopia. And also, Ethiopia is the second largest population in the entire Africa, and Ethiopia is also located adjacent to the Red Sea corridor, which is the main trade route to Europe and America and many other countries. So these are very critical considerations. So after Abiy assumed political power, Ethiopia's role in UN mission, for example, is reduced because when Abiy recalled many of the soldiers, the peacekeepers in Somalia, most of whom were Tigran soldiers and including senior military officials, very experienced, it created a vacuum, and Al-Shabaab started to mushroom. Recently there has been multiple attacks by Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and that's one of the problems for the deteriorating the peace process in the Horn of Africa. And I think the second factor is the West and its intentions. So the United States and Europe has been trying to resolve the crisis in Ethiopia. We all know that. But I think, as we all know, the UAE and Turkey has been using their drones during the recent war in Tigray in Ethiopia. And these drones use or utilize Western technologies partly. So that my concern is that if the West wants to end this war, and at the same time there are credible sources that drones, the UAE and Turkey drones are using United States and Canada technologies. So that's very confusing, so I'm not clear about that, the intention of the West to end the war. So that being said, I think any negotiation efforts can work depending on certain factors. First, the mechanism. So, in order to resolve any political crisis or conflict, you have to have a mechanism. The African Union as institution is, I think, one of the potential to resolve. But however, I think it's not practical because the African Union, from its genesis, from the very beginning, it's a post-colonial institution, mainly designed to restore and continue regimes. So once the European colonizers left Africa, many of these, the current dictators have to replace that, vacuum, and they're meant to continue and restore regime. So basically, the African Union is concerned about governments and regimes, not people. And for that, African Union failed in Rwanda when the genocide was committed, Somalia, in Libya, South Sudan. So when all this crisis happened, the African Union was just watching. So the African Union is just a useless institution up to the minimum. Article 4 of the African Union Constitution, or the Constitutive Act, allows the Union to interfere whenever there is serious humanitarian crisis in one of the countries. So throughout these 2 years, there's been very serious human rights violation in Ethiopia, including Oromia, Tigray, but the African Union turned a blind eye. They're muted. Actually, the chairperson lives in Addis, in the capital. He has seen like many Tigrayans, up to 30,000 Tigrayans has been incarcerated in concentration camps. But whenever asked, he would say this is a law enforcement operation to restore the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. So I don't have any faith in African Union and the people personally. So that's one of the problems. So the Ethiopian peace process is not going to work because the African Union as institution and individual leaders are not capable. They're not willing and able to resolve the crisis. European Union and US, they're doing their best, but at the same time, there's a gray area. So I'm not clear about it. At the same time, the technologies has been utilized against the Ethiopian civilian.
I apologize. If you could just make it, if you can wrap it up so I can ask the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, well, so my last conclusion is, in order to have a very meaningful, peaceful resolution, there has to be political will, good faith, a functional judicial and political process. None of them exist in Ethiopia. The African Union, European Union, all of them failed. So I think, that being said, I don't think there's hope to a peaceful resolution. Like I concur with my brother that only military solution could resolve it. That's my last conclusion.
Thank you. I want to turn to Renee now for the same question. Anything we missed that is important for the audience to know and understand about what's happening in Ethiopia, or what do you see as a potential future for Ethiopia in the next 2 to 5 years?
So thank you. Let me start by taking note of what happened in this meeting, or to summarize what I've understood from this meeting. From an outsider, it's very surprising to see the focus which is always put on the international community, the foreigners, the UN, the African Union, etc., etc., etc. Look at the comments which were published or aired about the end of the truce and the re-beginning of a war. So it looks like now many Ethiopians have accepted that the fate of their country is in the hands of foreigners. And this surprised me a lot, because Ethiopia is a symbol of sovereignty and independence in Africa and even in the world. So this leads me to recall two main features of the Ethiopian history. during the 30s, when Haile Selassie had the will to modernize his country, the first group of what could be called the intellectuals, Ethiopian intellectuals, appeared. They were called the Japanese, and they helped the emperor to find a way to modernize the country. Now, in the 60s, at the end of the 60s, 70s, Ethiopia had become, the imperial regime had become totally sclerotic. And then a movement appeared, the student movement, which at least thought about and proposed a different way, a way to allow Ethiopia to progress. If this way was the right one or the bad one is another question, okay? But now I didn't hear anything coming from the intellectual community as such. On the opposite, many, the majority of the Ethiopian intellectuals have contributed to this accelerated polarization of the Ethiopian society and to this the growth of what is usually called the ethnic hate. But I don't believe that any lasting solution could be found in Ethiopia without first and foremost an Ethiopian solution. The outsiders, they could only help, they cannot be the main actors of a solution in Ethiopia. So this, I would say that I believe that the intellectuals, Ethiopian intellectuals, have a very crucial role to play now. In my view, they are the only ones who can discuss together and I would say mark even only an embryo of roadmap to elaborate an innovative solution to the main question of the state building in Ethiopia. It doesn't need a world conference with, I don't know, many hundreds of people. It must start, and it can start very, very modestly, but it must start with a small group of very highly educated people who would gather together and start to discuss. And then I believe they could be progressively, step by step, joined by not only other educated people, but also opposition representatives of opposition parties, representatives of the civil society, etc., etc. They have the duty to show the way. They cannot, in my view, I will be very frank, the Ethiopians cannot rely on the international community to solve their problems. Thank you, and thank you for having invited me to this meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, and excellent points. I thank you for those. Dr. Faisal, I want to turn it to you for final thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. And I enjoyed listening to my colleagues here, and I completely endorse Renee's concept at two levels. I think Ethiopian intellectuals, and for that matter, the whole intellectuals have been subjected to NGO culture, in which case they seek solutions exterior from outside. When did the US, for that matter, or US and international groups ever solve Ethiopia's problem, or for that matter, any African conflict? Why is so much attention put on US and lobbying when we know that they have never solved it. Zaire, after 25 years, is still in the same position it was, actually getting worse. So at that level, I endorse René's concept. I am not a student of the Horn of Africa who begs for US resolution. 2 years, actually it has gotten worse between the first time the Tigray conflict happened and where we are today. The very element is that we thought were a bit progressive in the State Department are today literally in an indirect way justifying the genocide and the war. I like to mention here Samantha Powers, for whom I had tremendous respect in terms of her earlier work today, is now even in the position to negotiate with Abiy to see if she can buy his wheat to infuse cash to the cashless at Kilo. We've also seen how the envoy's attitude and Blinken's commentaries have been changing. When has America ever solved, since the Haile Selassie days, the Ethiopian conflict? I think it's just a pie in the sky to expect that. I'll also endorse René's concept of a localized solution, and I'll come back to that. But I see the status quo of Ethiopia to get worse, or stay at least in a stalemate. 3 years ago, I wrote an article where I identified 3 scenarios of the Ethiopian state. At the time, I didn't include the Rwanda, the tax scale. I think that's one scenario. I identified the Yugoslavia style. I also identified, and this was 2019, the other scenario that Ethiopia could end up was the Russian style, some amicable divorce for certain regions that the central government says they cannot hold. At the time, I was thinking of Somali region, but definitely Tigray region is another where, unless some medication, serious medication is found for what had happened in the last 2 years in Tigray, holding to Tigray, in my opinion, is also very difficult. The third is what I borrowed from Scale, which is the ruralization of Ethiopia. But there is also a fourth scenario, more and more I am now buying into, the Zairization of Ethiopia. The Zaires, where some regions will just remain volatile, just problematic. NGOs and the UN will be talking about how to work. Lately, we read a situation where makeshift airfields exist in Zaire, where this European mafia type planes come in, give weapons to whoever group that they want, and then take whatever they want in terms of diamonds and minerals. Ethiopia is close to that because 2 areas of Ethiopia has lost its sovereignty. On the Sudan side, Ethiopia has no sovereignty at all. On the Eritrean, it does not. Abiy is in no position today, even if the world forces, to say no to Isaias. So the Ethiopian, I think it was Isaias earlier, Ethiopia's territorial integrity is a passé. How you can regain it is another issue. The West had many options to get rid of the problem and even pacify Isaias, but it won't do it, both for international reasons and for other reasons. Arming Tigray would have taken care of Isaias instantly, in days. Unifying Tigray's forces with Eritrean opposition could literally immobilize Isaias in days, if not at the maximum months. Having said that, I think the second concept I would borrow from René is a localized mediation and conference to talk about small scale. I think a Somali group called it Congress for Somali Cause has already proposed that, René, small scale, consisting of several groups and intellectuals from all the nationalities and nations, gather them, iron out the issues. They have already put together a proposal. And I think that kind of small scale can begin a process that's inclusive, that is free, that is more open discussion for Somali to bring their historical injustice, as Skayal mentioned, because genocide and blockade and siege happened to Somalis in 2010. The world didn't really make up much about it. To justify put a little commentary, my father is a survivor of a 1948 genocide, where in a village that had 200 people, about 20 of them survived. Nobody knows. So I think a local discussion can open up both the past as well as the present issues, as well as even some of the conditions. Today in Addis Ababa, the Iraqi demonstration turned into against Abiy and Shimal's demonstration, where they were shouting down to Naftanya, down to Abiy, down to, these are the people, or the Oromo, who some people say they have the power. So I think we need to go deeper. I really buy the concept of going small scale. There is a planning concept that says small is beautiful. Schumpeter made this concept in the 1940s. Small is beautiful and small is possible to do. So with the Congress for Somali Cause, we can probably start that and then reach out to several groups and see if we can really re-own our process from the NGOs and the state departments and what have you, whose interest I really don't know at this point in time what they are looking for, because the death of a Tigrania mother, the burning of Oromo village is no longer a priority for the State Department. There are other things that may be priority for big nations and countries, but what matters for you and me is not really a priority. So we need to center our priority and start talking about local conversation that we own. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. And it's clear we could talk about this for hours if we have the time, truly. So I think we'll need a part 2, Hafsa. But I want to thank our panelists for this discussion, and I wish we could have got deeper. There's so much more to discuss, but I want to thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Hafsa for final comments. Thank you, Hafsa.
Thank you to our moderator, co-founder of Tigray Action Committee, Housen Gebremeddin. Ethiopia is at a critical juncture, and the future of the Horn of Africa is clearly uncertain. Collectively, we can make a change to bring atrocities in Ethiopia to an end. So this is one of the many discussions to come in the near future. The Institute will be holding an event in Minnesota in the coming month or so. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and our moderator and the Institute of the Horn of Africa Studies for holding such an important conversation. So thank you all, and have a wonderful Saturday.
Thank you.